And welcome to Impact 2023, our continuing conversation where we talk about all different topics and we talk about it from a Christian perspective. Talk about current events. We talk about social justice. We talk about just topics of the day, everything. And as always, we invite you to join us in this conversation by typing your comments and your questions into the comment section. And so feel free to type in whatever you want to type in and we will address it. We will bring the question or the comment on the screen, talk about it, address it, keep it going. So, don't just be a listener, be a participant. And as always, we hop into the topics. So everyone knows what's going on in the world. There are some extreme things going on in the world, and the most extreme thing that has gone on in the most recent event at this point in time on October the 10th is that just a couple of days ago, there was a terrorist attack, we'll call it that, in Israel. And so Hamas, for those of you who do not know, is the quasi ruling party government that's in Palestine, in Gaza, in Israel. And this may be, for people who don't know, that maybe it's just a lot of just words. But the main thing to know is that in Israel, there was a terrorist attack where, depending on the reports that you see, over 300, 500, 900, or even 1,500 Israelis were attacked and murdered by this group. And so that is the major topic. It is a little bit ironic because if you were with us the week before, we discussed the fact that this was a crazy time here in the United States and across the world. That some crazy things are going on, and how do we prepare and take care of those as the time gets wild and crazy? And lo and behold, it has gotten crazier and wilder. Not even just to look at Israel, where you're looking in again, I said the reports, depending on what report or what outlet you're looking at, anywhere from 300 to 1,500 people lost their lives. And that's just on the Israeli side, on not including all of the people who are now losing their lives on the Palestinian side. But not too far away from there, in Afghanistan, there was a humongous earthquake where over 2,000 people lost their lives. And so there are on top of that, you just have the regular. Or not regular, but you have the less spectacular events that are happening all over the world. And so, of course, we have to sit back and we have to look at this Israeli conflict. One, for two reasons. One, it is a horrific action that went on, and that's something that we discussed. And two, is because it's Israel. And then from a biblical standpoint, from a Christian standpoint, there's often a lot of conversation when it comes from, you're talking about Israel, you're talking about the land that is represented in the Bible, or parts of the lands that are represented in the Bible, and you talk about the Jewish people. And this is a very sensitive topic. There's been a lot of people who have been talking, social media, on regular, normal media, and people have gotten backlash for any comment that they've said. Whether the comment is in support of Israel, whether the comment is in support of the Palestinian people, whether the comment is just a cry out for humanity. People have been getting slapped down everywhere for their comments. And so for that reason, I didn't want to put anybody into any kind of situation of where they might say something where they would catch some backlash. So we'll be safe with our words, but still discuss the topic. And the discussion point from my standpoint is, one, we need to acknowledge that this is a horrible event, a horrific event. No one should really be sitting back here saying, well, that's what you get, or, whether if you're pro-Palestinian in the conflict, or you're a sympathizer with what's been going on, or how the Palestinians been treated, there's no reason to be like, well, that's what you get. And if you're pro-Israeli and pro the Jewish people in Israel, there's no reason to sit back and say, well, let's go out here and just wipe out everybody. This is a humanitarian situation where, regardless, it's horrible. It's horrible for the people who were murdered. It's horrible for the people in Israel, the Jewish people who now live under a cloud of terror. It's horrible for the Palestinian people who are now being bombed, or now are being subject to whatever retribution that's going to happen from Israel. It's a shame because you're sitting here with old men and women, old leaders who are in power, who are sitting back here making decisions about the lives of regular civilians and regular people who could care less about some of the conflicts that are going on between these people in power. And so you have a lot of innocent people, a lot of innocent bystanders, a lot of just civilians, people just like you and I, who are just trying to live a good life, provide for their families, provide for themselves. And they are caught up in this murderous conflict between powers, between people, between leaders who, at the end of the day, are not going to get into the conflict. They're just going to send people off to die. And so just for us, and what are we going to talk about here in the conflict? And we're not going deep into it. You can watch political shows or you can watch news shows to find that out. And I encourage you not to go to this is not the time to think that your phone, the internet, Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, your social media outlets are really going to give you good information. This is not the time for that. This is not the time to go to conspiratory sites. This is the time to get some genuine, real news, to go to reputable news sites if you really are interested in understanding what's going on in the global community. And that's what I encourage. So if you want to do that, go there. What we're talking about is basically the main thing that's going to go on here. Retribution, revenge. As much as we want to sit back, and as much as we, especially from the Christian standpoint, we talk about vengeance is the Lord's. Other people don't necessarily grab onto that concept. And us as Christians, we also struggle with that concept. And so when we look at this situation, Hamas is saying that, well, we're getting revenge. Some are saying we're getting revenge for how the Palestinian people in Gaza have been treated for years and years and years. And then you look at the Israeli side, and we hear everybody saying, well, the appropriate response is going to happen. We're going to get our revenge for the people who were killed and the hostages that were taken, and we're going to just bomb. And then we're going to do a crown war. They're saying we're at war. But as we discuss these things, I imagine that most people who are watching this or participate in this program are people, who discuss topics like this, who really get intellectually involved in what's going on. And just from time to time, we'll discuss with friends and family or whoever topics such as this. And when we talk about things, and when we talk about this conflict, what ultimately is going to come out is that we're going to talk about revenge. And as Christians, how do we view revenge? And Christians, how do we view revenge in a practical lifestyle way? We know what the Bible says, and we know what we should be aspiring to, and how do we get there? Because truth be told, vengeance is mine, said the Lord. But we have to deal with how do we make sure that we, as individuals, get to that point. Because we all, at some point in time, we all want revenge. We all want that get back. We all want to be fair. You're not going to come up in here and do such and such and such and such. What is my response? And how do we get to the point where we don't have to have that tit for tat response? Comment. I have a problem with how groups are labeled terrorists. We're the groups that attack the Capitol. We're the groups that attack the Capitol labeled terrorists. Was the KKK ever labeled a terrorist group? And the Proud Boys as well. It's a good point. And so internationally, like we'll look at Hamas, they're labeled a terrorist group. But you go to them and you go to some other people, they're a political group. They provide food and assistance for the people in the Gaza Strip, for the Palestinians there. They're the ones who are managing that governmental situation. They're managing the conditions that they were in, the poor conditions that they were in. Let's be honest, because what they're getting is rationed off a rationed off lifestyle. They're getting rations, where many people have said it's an open air jail because they're surrounded by the Israelis, and basically whatever comes in and goes out is monitored by them. And so Hamas is the leadership group who is taking care of that Gaza Strip situation. And so some people label them terrorists, some people label them they're officially the government or the governing party down there. I don't know. That's a good question of labeling terrorists, labeling different groups terrorist or terrorist groups. I think it's less. There's less ambiguity when you label things as terrorist attacks. And so, for example, when we start off here, that was a terrorist attack. That wasn't that was a terrorist attack, and it is very, very clear. It wasn't a declaration of a formal declaration of war. You weren't going soldiers against soldiers. You weren't going government organization against government organizations. You were going individuals just showing up and shooting people, civilians, people who had nothing to do with any kind of war conflict. And you can sit back and you can even say, well, in Israel, every adult has to go into the military for a certain amount of time. It's what they do when they become adults, the age of 18. I mean, you can say, well, okay, still a terrorist attack, because what they did was they attacked little children as well. They killed children as well. So it's not what is the group. It is more so what is the attack. We can all sit back and determine. I think it's easy to determine what's a terrorist attack versus what's not a terrorist attack. And again, if it's soldiers, that is going to be an act of war, an act of aggression. If your target is civilians, then there's a terrorist attack. But then we have to look at groups. Just because we don't like the group, do we call it a terrorist group? So Hamas, for the most part, now that they've done this terrorist attack, you can probably call them a terrorist group because of the type of attack that they did, even though they are a government. But yeah, that is a question, and it's also a weapon. We're being labeled a terrorist group because governments and people, we throw that around, and we throw that around to justify the things that we want to do. So we can call this group a terrorist group, or this group a hate group, or this group whatever. We want to label them so that we can treat those people a certain way. I think people need to earn those titles, and you earn those titles through the things that you do. And so as much as, many people have affinity for the Palestinian struggle, I do think in this situation, because of the result of what has gone on, you made a terrorist act, you could probably be called a terrorist group. But yeah, I don't, but I do agree with the comment, and I'm gonna bring it back up. The label actually isn't that important. Again, the whims and the whims of these leaders, these men and women who are in charge, no one really, what they want and what they do is not important. What's important is the individuals who have nothing to do with anything, who get caught up in these conflicts, the civilians who get killed, those people. And so these terrorist actions by anybody, I don't care if you're a formal group or not, we need to make sure that we take care of one another when it comes to those non-soldiers, and didn't sign up for this. But yeah, going back to the revenge. And so as again, this is a Jewish Palestinian conflict. This is more so a Jewish and a Muslim thing. Even though, as Christians, you sit back and we look, and many Christians believe, especially in the conservative, more conservative Christians, will sit back and say, well, we have to support Israel. Israel is, it's important. It's the biblical, foundation. It's where the Bible was placed in. And so then they people get on board. And even though this is a conflict between other groups and other religions, or other religious, historically with religious groups, Christians get involved emotionally and physically in some sense. But the question is, what's our label of revenge? I sit back and I say we as Christians shouldn't, or as just individuals, we have to look towards, and as hard as it is, we have to look towards forgiveness. And even if you're going to retaliate, even if there's a retaliation that you feel like is necessary, you can separate that sometimes, I think, from revenge. Revenge is that get back. Like, I have to make it, I have to get you for what you've done to me. Where I think sometimes retaliation can be a little bit different. But at the same time, we should be pushing for forgiveness, because that's what we're doing. The ultimately the hardest thing to do. Another comment. When the Israelis attacked the mosque a few months ago, was that a terrorist attack? And that's a good comment. So the answer is yes. Anytime you attack a civilian, you attack civilians, that's an act of terror. It's a terrorist attack. And so governments can participate in terrorist attacks. Governments definitely do. Anytime it's not, when you're not following the steps of a soldier to soldier, then it's definitely a terrorist attack. And so we definitely need to consider that. So even as we again, I think and I agree wholeheartedly with labeling groups. That's a little bit tougher, but we can label the attack. And anytime we're killing just people who are not involved in a conflict, that's a terrorist attack. Even if you had two gangs, and they fighting each other, two local gangs, two local groups of people, and they just fighting each other and doing whatever. As long as they're fighting one another, or other members of the group, you're fighting other members of the group. As bad as that stuff is, once you go outside and you just start to kill people, you're getting into that group of a terrorist attack. You're out here to cause terror to non-participants, to civilians, to people who are not involved in your conflict, and just everyday people. So anytime we're doing that, that's it's bad. It's unacceptable. I think it's definitely unacceptable, and we can't accept that and get on board with that. And that's what we can't get on board with revenge. I don't think we can really support that, and really call ourselves Christians, as much as we, want to be happy with one side or the other. Just supporting revenge is not our thing. Vengeance is not what we should be about. And so when we sit back and we say, well, man, I hope Israel goes in and does such and such and such and such to the Palestinian people, and does this and does that, and get back and blah, 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 blah. We got to be careful with that we don't get sucked in, to supporting vengeful actions. Because if we participate, or we validate, or we want to sit back and say, well, this is a good thing to do on this end, I believe, and I personally believe, that seeps into your life. And then now you're thinking, let's get revenge and get payback on this end, on this side. And as we all know, revenge usually doesn't work. It just causes revenge, causes the next revenge. And this get back causes the next get back. You got to do something very massive for the get back not to come back. You have to really wipe some folk out for them not to get back at you. So it causes that vicious cycle. And that's not what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be those people who try to support the idea of forgiveness, and support the idea of not coming in a vengeful nature, or if we can't get you to not be just totally vengeful, at least get you to limit yourself, and don't go all the way, and don't go all over on the deep end, and don't go into the best way I can say it is, in one of the movies, Star Wars has done it one of the best ways, and that's always what I kind of go to, because there's a lot of, when they made Star Wars, they put a lot of Christian references into it. But in Star Wars, they always talked about going over to the dark side, and what happens is revenge, hate, and anger takes you over into the dark side. And as much as that's a movie, there's a reality there that it actually does. You can be taken over into a dark space, and it doesn't just, that one act is not just a one act or isolated act. It takes you down into a bad path, and that's what vengeance does. It takes you somewhere where you don't need to go. It turns you into a person that you don't need to be, and for some of us, there's no coming back from that. And so I think we all need to be careful when we're talking, careful when we're looking at these situations, careful when we're looking at the horrific things that are going on, careful just in not only there but here, because as we talked last week and as we talk now, the world is getting crazy. The world's always been crazy, but crazy things are happening, and I guess maybe we're seeing them a little bit more, and we could quickly get into that whole vengeance area. As I was thinking about this earlier, we were putting this together. The irony is, when we're talking about vengeance, is we're sitting here, we're talking about Jews and Israelis getting vengeance, and we're talking about Christians, as Christians, how we should look at vengeance, and we have to remember that the Jews went through the Holocaust, and you don't really talk about that a lot, but when you talk about some of that. The idea that was floated out was an idea of vengeance towards the Jews. It was an idea of getting back at these people who have done such terrible things and trying to take over the world, or whatever the propaganda that they put out. And you see how quickly, not just a couple of people, but a whole entire country can slip into a bad area of where you go from being terrorized to being a terror, where you go from being someone who is oppressed to being someone who is the oppressor. And it's easy path to go down, easily slip down that path. And that's why we have to be careful. We have to be very careful when it comes to vengeance. We have to be very careful when it comes to revenge. We have to be very careful when it comes to our hate and our anger and controlling ourselves. And so I think that's what we need to do. If there's anything else that we see out of this situation, then it's going to play out, and it's going to go bad. From what everybody says, at the end of the day, there was no good scenario here. They murdered these folk, and as a result, a lot of other people are going to lose their lives. As a result, there's going to be a conflict, which they are now calling a war, the war in Gaza. Nothing good is coming out of this. Many people will lose their houses. Many people will lose their livelihoods. But more importantly, many people will lose their lives. And what we can't be, I think, is people who get on the side of, they need to get their revenge. Because that then pulls us into an unhealthy place where we don't need to be. Biblically, every time Israel ends up in a war or are attacked, the prophets always state it is a result of their disobedience. Nothing happens in a bubble. There was always a reason why things happen. This issue came about when Israel was made a state and given land that others occupied. And that's true. When we really sit back, and I'm not the biggest, I am not a fan of how Israel has acted with respect to the Palestinians. And that conversation is the one that has gotten a lot of people in some sticky situations and in some trouble. But the truth is the truth. You did not deserve what happened to you. That is not cool, not okay. No one should ever go out here and just murder people. If you're going to declare war, I feel like you need to declare war. But no one should ever go out here and just murder people. These people just going out here just randomly shooting folk who are at a festival and other things like that. And that's not unacceptable. And with that being true, it is also true that the treatment of the Palestinians caused some of the craziness to fester down there in the minds of people that they want to do terrorist activities. And so there has to be responsibility on both sides. You're making conditions, or you're adding to conditions where people are going to be, where you're harming people, where you're treating people poorly. They're going to act out. And so, unfortunately, at this point in time, because somebody has hurt you, you're not going to see the actions, or it's hard to see the actions that you need to that you need to take, that you need to stop hurting others. And for the Palestinians in Gaza, it's going to get worse for them, most likely. But hopefully, that someone realizes, and many people have. And the worst part about this is, there's probably been, as of right now, there's probably been more support before this activity, before this incident. There's probably more support for the Palestinians than ever before, because you would hear people talking about it all the time, that Israel has to stop their heavy-handed occupation of Gaza. But so it probably won't happen now, but eventually there needs to be a reckoning of sitting back and looking at yourselves. Israel has to sit back and look at itself and say, how are we treating others? And as this comment just stepped right into it, how are we treating others? What is our disobedience? What are we doing here? Did we bring some of this to ourselves? And that's a real conversation. That's a real conversation that has to be had. And again, it probably won't be anytime soon, because Israel right now is in the mode of getting revenge. And as individuals, we have to make sure that we're not on that mode as well. All right. I know it was a tough topic. It was a sticky topic. Again, there's been a lot of people who have gotten in trouble, gotten your foot stuck in your mouth, and all of this kind of stuff off of this situation. And so be careful. Be careful with what you're saying. This is an emotionally charged situation. This is this is different from other things, because this is thousands of years in the making. This is not a conflict that happened overnight. This isn't something that is even a 100-year war. This is, you're looking at 1,000 years. So be careful and be educated on what's going on. But remember, as Christians, as individuals of faith, we have to make sure that we don't get sucked into hate, anger, and revenge. Vengeance is mine, said the Lord, let's leave it to him. And so for those people who are down there, whether you be Palestinian or Israeli, be Muslim, be Jew, be whatever, I'm praying that this situation, that the best possible thing can happen in this situation. That the best possible thing that can happen in a terrible situation. All right. Well, that's our time. As always, thank everybody for coming. And then we remind you that on Thursdays, Thursday Thirst, and the good part about Thursday Thirst, especially now in times like this, when you're looking at places like Israel and Gaza and everything like that, let's get some history on it, some biblical history on it. So you can come in on Thursday Thirst and get that. Also on Sundays, 10 o'clock here, Facebook and YouTube, or in person if you look at the address. Please join us for service. All right. Thank you. Have a good one, and join us again.